Hello, and welcome to Book Passage's Conversations with Authors. I'm your host, Paula Farmer. If you are a longtime customer and or viewer of our events, you know we like to bring quality, just the very best book talks there are with outstanding books and noteworthy authors. If you're new to us, you are in for a treat. Tonight will be a great example of what we like to do all the time. And we do ask that all of you, kind of hit that button below and like and subscribe, because it really does help us. It takes you just a second to do that, but it helps Book Passage a lot. And also, we encourage you to go to bookpassage.com and you can find out about all our upcoming events. Some of them are online, just like tonight. Some of them are in person in San Francisco or Puerto Madera, and some are even a combination of both. So definitely we keep everything updated on our website. Also, please remember, we want your comments, we want your questions. We will get to that before the end of the program. But for now, I'd love to bring to our virtual stage our authors. Our featured novel, At the Hour Between Dog and Wolf, is the fascinating yet heartbreaking story of a 12-year-old Parisian Jewish girl in World War II France, living in hiding as a Catholic orphan with a family in a small village. The novel has gotten a glowing write-up from the Sunday's New York Times book review, and look for it this next weekend as it gets named as an editor's choice. Yay for Tara Ison, the author. Tara is the author of the novels The List and A Child Out of Alcatraz, along with award-winning short stories and essay collections and anthologies. Tara's writings have appeared in publications such as the Oprah magazine, Salon, the Kenyon Review, the Los Angeles Times, and of course, the San Francisco Chronicle, along with many, many other publications. In conversation with her, graciously agreeing to be our moderator tonight, is the equally talented Meredith Hall. Her memoir, Without a Map, was instantly recognized as a classic of the genre and became a New York Times bestseller. Her work has appeared in 5 Points, the Gettysburg Review, the Kenyon Review, the Southern Review, New York Times, and many other publications. With that, let's welcome them both to our Book Passage stage. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you so much, Paula. We had a scheduling glitch when this was originally scheduled. I really appreciate Book Passage working to make it happen again. And I just want to say thank you. I'm just so honored to be talking with Meredith Hall. And Meredith, thank you for agreeing to do this.
Well, it is my privilege and pleasure, Tara. So I'm very happy to be here. I know people are going to want to hear you talk about your book, and I think it's truly an extraordinary book. It's a very brave book, and I want to talk with you. Toward the end, I'll ask you some questions about your actually writing this book. But one of my first questions is this. I came across the information that you started this book 25 years ago. What was that journey like for you? Why 25 years?
Thank you. My first novel, A Child Out of Alcatraz, was published in '95. And pretty soon after that, I started thinking, oh, I suppose I have to write another book. And I started casting about for what to write about. And my stepmother, who I met when I was 12 years old, amazing woman. She was a hidden child in World War II. She was a 5-year-old little Hungarian girl who was sent to live on a farm with a Catholic family and given a Catholic name and taught the Catholic prayers, was warned, don't ever speak to the police, don't ever cry. And I learned that about her very, very early on when I met her. And so, jump forward to 1996, 1997. And I thought, wow, that is something I would really like to write about. And I started thinking about it. I knew she was only 5 years old and she doesn't remember much of what happened. And thank God she survived the war. Her mother survived the war. They came to the United States. So I knew that this wasn't going to be her story. So I decided to set the novel in France rather than her Hungary, because I knew nothing about Hungary or Czechoslovakia, and I thought I knew about France and French history. You know, I knew, oh yeah, the Vichy government, they collaborated with the Nazis during World War II. I'd been to France several times, and so it was initially, it was almost an arbitrary choice. Like, well, I'll just set it in France. And I started doing the research, and I had no idea what collaboration with the Nazi government actually meant. And so the novel for me really became about the question of identity and how fragile identity can be. My character is 12 years old. She lives in Paris with her parents at the beginning of the war. And I was really interested in, how do you take such a vulnerable mind? You know, she's a child, but she's also in a time of war and a time of extreme peril and privation. And she's absolutely terrified. She's terrorized, and she's put into this situation with these absolute strangers. And she feels alone in the world, and how vulnerable someone like that might be to the kind of manipulation and indoctrination and propaganda of fascist ideology, you know, which is what the Vichy government and the Nazi government was all about. So I did a lot of research, and yes, the years went by, and I would work on the book, and then I would stop and I would work on another book. And I started trying to find a publisher about 10 years ago. And I joke, this is the most rejected book I've ever written. 35 agents and 30 publishers turned it down. And, you know, each time I thought, okay, you know, are they right? You know, does this book not work? And I would go back to it and I would do more work, but I couldn't turn it into something it wasn't. You know, I couldn't make it into a book that it wasn't. So I just kept going back to it and hopefully making it better and better and better, until I finally found a home with IG Publishing last year. And to have it exist in the world, I'm so grateful my stepmother is still alive and is incredibly supportive and celebrates it with me. And it's been quite a journey.
And I would imagine your stepmother would be, excuse me, quite grateful to you for telling her story in your form, in your own way.
I think she's grateful that I am telling a story about the experience of hidden children. And, you know, there were no hidden child had the same experience. You know, no two hidden children had the same experience. Thousands and thousands of different experiences based on circumstances and et cetera. So it's definitely not her story, but I think she's very proud that I am telling a story that investigates the kind of trauma experienced by children of war and hidden children.
And especially now, so much time has gone by, and there's starting to be, you know, questioning of whether these events ever even really happened, and the people that lived these lives are passing on. So it's the timeliness. I think, Tara, actually, in spite of how difficult it was for you, those 25 years passing are that has been to this book's and to your readers great benefit, because now is the time to tell this story. I hope so.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the time to tell the stories. As you say, you know, we're losing the generation who experienced this kind of genocide and trauma. Another reason why the 25, you know, the delay in getting it published and the timeliness of it is interesting is, when I first started writing, I was primarily interested in the psychological experience. How do you take a vulnerable mind, break them down, and turn them into another person? But when I picked the novel up again, I had put it down for a couple of years. I picked it up again about 6 years ago and was shocked to read passages I had written 5-10 years earlier that I was hearing world leaders, you know, talk about now. And the bigotry, the anti-Semitism, the xenophobia, fascism. You know, it's like, have we not learned anything? It is happening all over again, and that's terrifying.
And the ways in which we are showing that we're willing to turn our heads away from horror. So, yes. Okay, I have another question. I also read that you mentioned at one point that whole awkward relationship I have with faith and religion and Judaism itself. And I loved that. I was very interested in that. So that whole awkward relationship that you have with faith and religion and Judaism itself, I wondered how that awkward relationship came to bear on your writing this story about faith and religion and Judaism.
What a great question. Thank you. Yeah, I am Jewish, but I always joke I'm a very bad Jew. I am not observant at all. I am devoutly secular. My parents were devout atheists, but I always felt a cultural connection to Judaism, even though I didn't follow it from a religious or as a religious or spiritual practice. My grandmother was born in Poland, Jewish, immigrated. It meant that identity meant a lot to her, and I always felt aware that I was part of a lineage that had gone through stuff. It was actually my father. My mother's Jewish. My father was Lutheran. And I remember I was probably 8 or 9 years old, and my father was the one who told me about the Holocaust and told me about it. And he wanted to tell me about it. He said, because he wanted me to know how important it was that I know that I am Jewish and to honor that experience. So growing up, I would say half of my friends were Jewish and half of them weren't. And I thought that's how the world worked until I was probably a teenager, and I realized, no, that is not the demographic of the world. I don't feel I ever experienced any anti-Semitism directly. You know, maybe I did and I wasn't aware of it, but in writing this book, I've joked sometimes that it in a way it made me a better Jew, because it made me so aware of my privilege that, you know, it's easy for me to not feel that being Jewish puts me at any kind of risk. I didn't grow up in that society. I didn't grow up in that culture. And I had the privilege of not worrying about my existence in the world. And in writing this book, I mean, you know, yes, I knew about the Holocaust. I knew about anti-Semitism, but I had to live it. You know, I had to really experience it. I think it's why Danielle, my 12-year-old, you know, she's not from a religious family either. They're very secular Jews. And in a way, she finds it easy to, as the novel goes on, and she's increasingly exposed to the anti-Semitism around her, including within the household of the people who have taken her in. I think that makes it easier and easier for her to detach from a Jewish heritage. And she transitions over the course of the novel into being a devout Catholic. So I had to do a lot of research into Catholicism in order to understand what it might offer her, what it might mean to her, what she might find there. And, you know, in a simple way, her father is killed in the early days of the war before her mother takes her and leaves her with these people. Her mother has left her. She feels abandoned by her mother. And I think one of the most profound experiences that she finds in Catholicism is the comfort of, you know, our Heavenly Father, our Blessed Mother. They are always there for you. She will never be alone. And I think that is something that provides such emotional nurturing for her. So that is part of what paves the way. And I had to, you know, I'm not a religious person, especially when it comes to organized religion, but I had to really learn to understand and appreciate the beauties of both Judaism and Catholicism.
You wrote a transcendent scene in which Marie-Jeanne discovers during her, I believe it's her first communion in the Catholic Church, she's acting. She's taken on a new name, new clothing. She is supposed to be the young niece of this family, And she's actually practiced at home how to say prayers, when to stand, when to kneel. And I believe it's during her first communion when she is apprehensive and not a believer. In fact, suddenly she has a profound sense of connection to her father, her missing father. And communion in church actually becomes communion with the father that she longs for so much. It's a very, very beautiful conflation that you do as she starts to make this move into believing in some way. She takes on this faith, and it's, I think, very clearly in that scene with the communion, it's because it feeds her, it nurtures and it sustains her, and nothing else around her is providing that for her at that point.
Thank you. I mean, that's exactly what I was going for, that when she takes the communion wafer into her mouth, and these are early days, she still, thinks, oh, the Catholicism thing is ridiculous, but it's sort of a Proustian moment. It triggers a memory of having cookies with her father on their Sunday afternoon walks together before he was killed. And she had been trying to repress memories of her father being killed because it was just too painful, but that it sort of floods her with the memory of her father. And that is that sort of first connection between her own father and Jesus is the Father, God is the Father, the Holy Spirit. It opens the door to her finding, a parent, faith, love in that experience. Thank you. That scene is so. I feel like that scene is so crucial to the novel. And I will tell you one side little story. It's not a story, but I did have an editor who was interested in the book. This was quite a while ago. And they wanted that entire scene cut because they didn't think and that was like, no, that's like the heart and soul. That's the beginning of everything.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. I'm very interested in, you say that you're an atheist and did not grow up in the Catholic Church. I don't think had a lot of knowledge of the Catholic Church. And yet you write what becomes a fervor for Marie-Jeanne. And that fervor is the beginning, the source of what allows her to move toward fascism. It's actually her.
Oh, Meredith, you just froze up.
Joan of Arc is her great martyred model, and it makes her feel this fervent attachment to the church, makes her feel that there is purpose and rightness to what she is starting to think, and it makes her very vulnerable to her supposed uncle and cousins' messages about fascism. But it seems to me that starts with her, that fervent belief that starts to bubble in her. And I'm interested in what that was like for you to write as a non-believer. It seems to me you nailed it, Tara, that a child's almost ecstatic discovery of something that can sustain her when she's in so much trouble. I think you do a beautiful job. How did you discover that fervor and write that fervor about a faith, that even about rituals that were not yours? Yeah.
I mean, the easy answer is, well, I did a lot of research. I read a lot of books. I went to several Latin masses, both here in the States and when I was doing research in France. And I really came to appreciate the rich sensuality of Catholicism. They get you on every level, the sounds, the smells, the sights. It's an extremely sensual and emotional religion, which, was something I hadn't really appreciated. So I think I was able to enter into it, not so much from a spiritual, religious angle, but I think I was able to get into that space through the emotional and sensual experience of it. I I feel like I so understand Danielle and her fear and her longing and her loneliness and her terror, and finding, she's surprised to find some solace in the Catholic ritual. I mean, I think ritual is so incredibly important. I think it's an anthropological thing. I mean, I might not participate in religious rituals, but I'm a really rigid ritualistic person. Like, I've got my breakfast ritual and my crossword puzzle ritual, and
yes, we long for it. We have a need for it.
Yeah. And I think that when she starts taking those first steps toward Catholicism, it's also the first steps she is taking away from her true identity. She's leaving
Yes.
little Jewish girl behind and entering into a new relationship with the world,
Right.
and God, and the role of Catholicism, under the Vichy government, or after, throughout World War II, is very complicated.
Right.
And I want to be really careful here that I'm not dissing Catholicism. It's not like, I'm not saying Catholicism leads to fascism. It's more that is a first step away from her identity, which I think opens her up to influences looking to reshape her and reshape her psyche according to the rules that they, and by they I mean the Vichy government, that they want to turn their citizens into loyal, law-abiding fascists. And you're exactly right. She buys into the what we are doing is for the best mentality. That's why the Vichy government happened in the first place. It's like, this is best for France. We can stop the killing of our army. We can stop the killing of our people if we agree to work with the Germans. This is how we will save ourselves. And the propaganda was so heavy on, we are doing the right thing. And that's why I've got that quotation as an epigraph at the beginning of the book from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, where he says, to do evil, a human being must first believe that what they're doing is good. Yes. And she conflates, acts of goodness as she is, learning through the experience of Catholicism with what Vichy and the people in her home and the town and the mayor and all of these people around her are telling her is for the good.
Yes,
and she does take that on as a mission, but that leads her down a very, very dangerous and destructive path.
Yes, and tragic path. Yeah, I do want to comment that I think part of what has allowed you to write some of this world, the world of Catholic faith and Catholic ritual, is that actually you were experiencing it. The reader experiences it purely through Danielle, through Marie-Jeanne, and you so clearly, Tara, have a memory of what it feels like to be that 12-year-old girl. Your empathy and compassion for her is so palpable in this story. So I have another question for you. I have several questions for you. One is that as I started to think about these characters, about the girl herself, about her father, her mother, who lost her husband and then gave up this child to save her child's life, her adopted family, who believed in fascism and yet lost a child for it, her best friend, and the priest, even the priest. Each of these characters carries such tragedy. Tragedy is so much a part of their lives. And yet somehow you move us by the end of this book to a sense of hope. And you are so light-handed with it, Tara. This is not an invitation to leave this book feeling wonderful about the world. You are so light-handed about it, but you offer the reader a memory, a remembering that there is also goodness and there is hope. And I'm wondering, what for you as you wrote this, what is the source of that hope in the context of this story? How did you as a writer find hope in a world that was behaving the way it was in this story?
That's tricky to answer right now because I in life I am really struggling to have some hope. I think we're in a very dark time and a very bleak time, and I have to really struggle to believe, excuse me, believe that we can come out of this. It was hard, excuse me, it was very challenging to find the right note to land on. And I will be very, very cynical and honest with you that I knew that if I did not end this book with just a hint of hope, you know, redemption, atonement, that would be a problem. So, but I also know I couldn't take her, sorry?
I was going to say, you know, writing my novel, Beneficence, I struggled at the end because I recognized that the reader, we can't exhaust the reader. The reader can only bear with us through so much of human struggle. And yet we don't want to offer them a false story of there having been no harm and no effect. We have to reckon with that. And I really understand what this must have been like for you as you face the end of this book, saying, I have to offer my readers something, and it has to be genuine. I can't just say it, I have to believe it. And that's hard, that's big work.
It's really hard. It's also why, like I said, I couldn't take her too far down that path. You know, toward the end of the novel, she has a reckoning. She has to face who she has become, what she's done. And she has a crisis of faith, a crisis of conscience, a crisis of identity. You know, Danielle, the girl she once was, is gone forever, is never coming back. But she also knows that the girl she has become, Marie-Jeanne, can't continue either. She can't continue to live with that psyche.
Right.
But she doesn't know. So now she's no one. She doesn't know who she is. But she knows she is going to have to reconstruct an identity, a life. She doesn't know how to do it. But I wanted to end on a note of, you know, her knowing that she must, and that, you know, she I don't want to give anything away, but she, you know, she has to take the one step forward.
Yes.
The only way I felt like I could take her further along the path to redemption, atonement, self-awareness, insight, would have been to do a time jump.
And
I didn't want to do that.
There's this wonderful short scene, very intimate scene in which Marie-Jeanne goes to the priest, to Monsieur Bonnard, and no, to the priest, I'm sorry, to the priest, and says, essentially, can I be forgiven? And he himself is struggling with a fracturing of his own faith and his own belief. But what he comes to is to say to her, you are loved. And love is going to be the thing. He can't give her a larger
Solution,
reassurance that God is going to come down and offer her a hand of pure forgiveness. But he says you are loved, and love is what is going to carry you through this. I thought it was a really beautiful, delicate scene, really beautifully done.
and it is a choice. Again, I don't want to, you know, give anything away. But love is part of the choice she makes at the very end.
Yes, right. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And receiving that love too.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think another thing about love, and we haven't talked about this much, is part of this transformation that she undergoes, becoming devoutly Catholic, and, you know, becoming a good little fascist and a good little French fascist, is how it changes her relationship with these people that took her in, you know, her fake aunt and uncle. who initially she gets there and they're, you know, peasants and they're ignorant and they're Catholic and she's very disdainful of them. But over the course of the novel, they bond and she grows to love them deeply and they deeply love her. And she actually, you know, they're getting older. She's now 13, 14, 15. She takes on the responsibility of taking care of the family, of finding food and looking after them, out of love, out of genuine love for them.
Yes. Well, so a corollary question for me about these tragic lives is that I started realizing the great heroism that you've written into so many of these characters. And then so I made a list and thought, well, this child, you could not have created greater heroism in a child, the courage that it required. Her father, who left the house in search of some kind of security and food, some kind of way to sustain his family in these terrible times. Her mother, who lost her husband and then single-handedly took this child across the countryside a long way and gave her up into what she hoped would be a safe situation. This family, this Catholic family, who took her in only because of loyalty to her grandmother and grandfather that they had worked for once upon a time. They took her in at tremendous risk to themselves. And there's a mention of them having been paid some money, but in fact, it turns out they never actually.
She misinterprets that, yeah.
Yeah. And her best friend, the child, and who lives with grace in the face of what's coming at her. And even the priest, who is heroic, preaching love from that pulpit every week, even when the realities are moving closer and closer to them. So I thought about, this is the same list. These people are both carry these tragedies, and they're also this heroic. And I was fascinated by that, Tara. And I wondered, how did you understand as you wrote them that you were making these characters that walked in both of those stories of being just extraordinarily, almost inexpressibly courageous as we try to imagine living those lives, and also tragic, often because of the mistakes they themselves make in their lives.
I don't think I went into writing these sort of supporting characters with this intention, but as the novel evolved, I felt that it was happening, which is almost every single character who we get to know in the novel changes radically by the end of the novel. And a lot of that happens off screen because we're limited to Danielle, then Marie-Jean's perception. So she is often not necessarily aware of how the people around her are changing. And I really wanted to show, that in a time like this with such stakes, life and death stakes, the privation. I mean, the Germans were systematically starving the French. The daily terror of bombs and guns and I agree with you, the heroism of people who risked their own lives to help other people. I mean, we all, I think, want to believe that in these situations we would be brave and noble and honorable and do the courageous thing. I can't say that I would. So I really wanted to show the effects of war, occupation, persecution, bigotry, fascism. I wanted to show a range of how different people survived and managed, and the choices that they made, some of which were heroic, some of which were tragic, never knowing day to day if it's the right choice. But that was really something that interested me, is not just the trajectory of my main character, but having all of the people around her having these very, very complex experiences as well.
And there is this message that these are not bad people, this Claude these are not bad people. These are people who were part of the circumstances of that moment in history in that place. And they created great harm, but you force us to face the fact that each of these people had goodness in them. Every one of them did.
Yeah,
So,
I would say one exception to that would be Lucien, who's one of my favorite characters, who doesn't change at all. He's a Vichy official who manipulates Marie-Jeanne and basically grooms her to be an informant. I'm happy to label him evil. But yeah,
he's chilling.
I think he's chilling. I mean, he's only in 2 scenes, but writing those 2 scenes was so engrossing to me. I think there are very few purely evil people in the world, and the rest of us are just.
You wrote one, yeah. So I was going to ask you about that. I'm going to go ahead in my questions. Okay. One of my questions for you was to say, wow, you wrote these scenes, these 2 scenes you're talking about, in which Jean-Marie is so attracted to both the charisma of this man and also the message of his confidence in his rightness. And it is so disturbing to read these scenes. It is just,
it just makes me very happy, Meredith, that it was so disturbing. It's wonderful.
It should. You did an incredible job of making us resist these scenes because we know what's coming and it's so horrific. They're very convincing scenes. But I figured if they're that hard for us to read, they must have been really, really difficult for you to write. And I wonder what that experience was like for you to write scenes that are so abhorrent. They are abhorrent scenes. And how did you maintain, this is a second question, how did you maintain sympathy for Marie-Jeanne at a time when the reader in those scenes is at risk of losing sympathy for her? And we remember that she's just a child and look where she came from, but she is about to do some terrible things. And you maintained sympathy and compassion for her as you created her through those scenes. So I'd love to hear you talk about that.
I hope so, because again, I agree. She's 12. Yeah. She's almost 13 when they meet for the first time. She's 15, almost 16 when they meet the one other time.
Yes.
And those 2 scenes, I spent a lot of time on those 2 scenes because they had to be so carefully calibrated. What I'm hoping for is that the reader will understand and perhaps still empathize with Danielle Marie-Jeanne because of I feel funny saying this, but like the brilliance with which Lucien manipulates her. Both scenes in a way are like a fencing match. I thought of it as, sort of a thrust and parry. And she always thinks she knows what's going on, but he's always 2 steps ahead of her. So she starts down this path with him thinking that she's getting out of, doing the right thing, but then he turns it and she has to sort of like run after the new thing that he's dangling in front of her. He praises her, he flatters her, he keeps her off guard. He knows her buttons. I mean, the guys are, and there are people like this in the world, sociopaths, who know how to manipulate because they can read where the vulnerable spots are. They can read where the trigger points are, and they know how to play them in just the right way that they can lead a person down a path and I think we are all vulnerable to that kind of manipulation. I mean, like, again, we all would like to think that, oh, I couldn't be conned, I couldn't be scammed, I couldn't be manipulated like that, indoctrinated like that, propagandaed like that, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we can, because we're human and we're fallible and we all have weak, vulnerabilities. And Lucien in both scenes. He's different in both scenes. In the first scene, he treats her like a little girl. In the second scene, several years later, he treats her like a young woman. He's found
Yes.
a different tool,
Yes.
by which to manipulate her. I mean, they're both grooming scenes. He senses that she can provide him with valuable information, and he's very good at his job.
Information. Yeah. Okay, I have another question. There is an exquisitely tender scene at the end of the book in which Berta is saying goodbye to this girl. I would love to have you talk about what kind of gift that was to a girl who is now already, as she walks out the door, Danielle. This is Berta saying goodbye, in fact, to Marie-Jean,
Yeah.
as she becomes Danielle again. Can you talk about
Yeah, I had never actually,
the gift of love?
I had never actually envisioned that moment. That moment was a relatively late addition to the novel, and I think it came about because I really wanted to honor the connection and the bond between Marie-Jean and Berta, who is the woman who takes her in.
Yes.
And they she's an older woman. And Danielle is the daughter she never had, and Danielle initially sort of rolls her eyes at that, but over the years, comes to again love very, very deeply. And I felt that to not allow them a moment, it's a silent moment, there's no dialogue, but
Right.
I knew that there needed to be a moment where Berta, I'm trying to decide how much to give away here. Marie-Jean has had her sort of crisis of conscience, of identity, and knows something. She has to find a new life and a new way of being in the world. And I decided it needed the moment where Berta realizes that's happened, that she's lost this child, this daughter that she has come to love very deeply. But she has to accept that, and she has to let Marie-Jean go and become whatever person she's going to become now, and live whatever life she's going to live now. So I wanted that moment between them, because I really wanted to honor the relationship that I felt had developed between the two of them.
It's a gorgeous scene, Tara, and without dialogue. It is, and in a twilight light. The light is the very early morning light, and it's a subdued light. It's just a very, very beautiful scene.
Thank you so much.
Okay, let me ask you this. As you move into your next writing, are you finding that you need to write a book that is less costly to you? This demands less of your heart.
Yeah. I mean, I will write another novel someday. I've got one I've been playing with for a couple of years. I've got a couple of other books I've been playing with off and on for a couple of years. Right now, I'm sort of returning to writing some short stories because I need a little more. I need a little more space. The idea of a whole book in the sense of a novel or a nonfiction book just seems so massive to me, and the idea of just working with a story in this sort of smaller canvas feels like about all I can manage right now. I'm a little exhausted from my time spent in Vichy, France.
And I find, with beneficence out in the world, it's very, very difficult for me to move to a new writing. I really need some time to not be inside beneficence, which has held my heart in very large ways. And so I think it does take time to, I admire writers very much who say, well, I've already started my next book. And I think you have. I haven't, my book is out in the world and it's moving through the world, and I'm not done with it yet. I'm still with that book. So I can't imagine. I would think that it would take quite a while for you to move beyond that book. So
I'll get there. But yeah, I haven't left World War II France quite yet.
And I see Paula has come on, giving us the heads up that it is time for some questions from people watching
Yes,
this.
yes, and we do have some questions from audience members,
Wonderful.
booksellers, and myself. So while we have a few minutes before we need to wrap up, I'd love to throw this to you. One is, I would like to know, actually, Tara, as a writer, is it particularly challenging to write historical fiction in comparison to literary fiction or other genres? And I'm saying that because the obvious research seems like there would be more research involved in it.
Yeah. First of all, I don't necessarily draw a line between historical fiction and literary fiction. I think any genre can be very, very, very literary. But you're exactly right. I mean, the research that goes in to something like this was huge and massive. And I love research because first of all, because it's a great excuse not to write. Ha ha ha. And still tell myself, oh, but I'm working on the book today. I've got to watch this 7-hour documentary on Vichy France. But you never know what you're going to discover. The jewels that you can discover through the research that you can use narratively, structurally, that inform the character, that give you language. I would never have come across the phrase entre chien et loup, between dog and wolf, without researching this world. So I do love research. But that said, I find I tend to my short stories also, not that they're necessarily historical, most of them are contemporary, but if the character has a job I don't have, I do a lot of research on that. I still want to really, really try to understand my character's experience of the world. And if they're living in a different place in the world, or have a hobby or a job, or whatever it is. I mean, Meredith, this, like you want to capture the authenticity and the verisimilitude, and you've got to get your details right about what their lives are like.
That's right.
So to me, that's one of my favorite parts of writing anything, is learning as much as I can about the world my character inhabits, even if it's contemporary.
Yeah, and it's interesting how you mentioned how there's always research involved regardless of the genre. It's just a matter of to what degree or what you knew going into the project. And I can't think of his name to save my life, but there was a very prolific writer who did a lot of literary fiction and mysteries. And he said what he loved most was actually the research. And he really struggled with once the research is done and kind of getting into the writing, because he got so involved in the research.
Yeah.
So I find that, and he did not write historical fiction. So that's interesting. And you did touch upon the title, and Allison asks the title. She says the title is very intriguing, and she hasn't read the book yet. She would love to know where it comes from and what exactly it means.
I so wish I could remember the moment I came upon that title. I mean, it was several years ago. It was somewhere in my research, and I came across that phrase, entre chien et loup, between dog and wolf, and it's a French idiomatic expression for twilight or dusk.
Oh.
And it clicked for me, partly because I just love the sound. I love the poetry of it. I love the sound of it. The hour between dog and wolf. I love that. I think it's beautiful. But it also, to me, works on so many levels in the novel, because it really is dead on about the process of transformation and how subtle the gradations are. You cannot tell the moment that the day becomes the night. The dog becomes the wolf. Goodness turns to badness. It is these tiny little subtle shadings, which is what I wanted to capture in the book. So I felt like it worked on a poetic level. I felt it worked on a symbolic level. And I was also able to integrate it into the novel in a way that felt very organic and realistic. She remembers before her father was killed, walking, so that they would spend Sunday afternoons together, and they would walk home at twilight, and they would stop on the bridge, and her father would point to the twilight sky and say, okay, you look and you tell me the exact moment when day turns to night. And, it's their little ritual. And, she says every time I looked and looked and looked, and I could never tell the exact moment that it happened.
Wow. That's
So,
amazing. I love that. I love that whole concept,
mm,
and how it definitely is a demarcation of your characters and the book and the story.
yeah.
And leading into the next question, actually, by Cheryl. It's amazing because she says that you not only navigate wartime realities and religion, but also issues of class. As Danielle transitions, and she used that word transitions from one class to another. So very interesting. She would like you to kind of explain that a little bit more, dealing with
Yeah.
that issue of class.
Definitely. When the novel begins, she's 12 years old. She lives with her parents in Paris. She's an only child. She's overindulged. She's a little pampered, a little spoiled. Her father's a professor, but her mother comes from money, and they live a very, very comfortable life. They have a maid, they have jewelry, they go to the theater and the opera. It's a land of plenty that she has grown up in, and sophistication. She's or at least considers herself to be a very sophisticated little girl. And part of this new experience is, okay, now she's a peasant. Now she's living in a little farming village out in the country, in the middle of nowhere, and she has to milk the cow and dig the potatoes. And as the war goes on, again, the privation becomes quite, just getting food to feed you, to keep your family fed, was extremely difficult and extremely challenging. And, the weather and not having warm clothing, and, how she has to manage the daily needs and necessities of life under extremely reduced circumstances. She rises to the occasion. She, in some, the paradox is, in some ways, she becomes a better person, while, also becoming a fascist. But some of her values actually change for the better. Like I said, she grows to, really love the people who are taking care of her and wanting to take care of them. So yeah, I don't know if that really addresses the question, but that was part of wanting to start the character in one place, and see how far away that place, how far away I could get her by the end of the novel. And some of that, absolutely, socioeconomic status.
Yeah. And now I've got one last one that actually goes to both of you. Whether we're talking fiction or nonfiction, essays, short stories, articles, however you want, whichever genre we're talking about, who are some of the writers and some of the books that influence your writing, your work, or influence you personally? I'm putting that to both of you. Let's start with me.
Meredith, I'm going to let you start with that.
Yeah.
So, I have a list of heavies, I have to tell you. I admire Faulkner very, very much. I think that I read writers that offer me permission in some way to do things that I want to do and might not dare to do. And Faulkner is one of those writers for me. He tells powerfully intimate stories through detail. The large events are all couched in small detail, and we become immersed. Some people who don't like Faulkner feel that we get flooded. We're drowned in detail, but I love him. I really like W.S. Sebald's work. He's a writer who gives me permission. I've become a huge fan of a Norwegian writer whose name is Vassaas, Vasaas. I came across a book that he wrote a couple of years ago called The Birds, and it is truly one of the most spectacular novels I've ever read, and was deeply influential. And all Toni Morrison and Virginia Woolf was very influential in essay writing. Montaigne, I love Montaigne's essays. You know, it just, the list is long. So there are so many gifts that come to us with these writers.
Yeah. And I think different writers influence us in, very, very different ways, depending on, the project that we're working on in the moment and the kind of spiritual support and influence that we've gotten from other writers. There might be an era where I'm really into Jeanette Winterson, and then there might be another era where I'm really, into Toni Morrison because I'm speaking to them or I'm listening to them in my head a little bit as I work.
Marilyn Robinson. Yes, we can't leave Marilyn Robinson off that
oh,
list.
thank you. I was going to reference her. I was going to reference Toni Morrison, especially how they capture adolescent girlhood.
Yes,
which
right.
I don't feel gets the honor it deserves. So I'm just going to give one very specific, which is Margaret Atwood's Cat's Eye. Probably my favorite Margaret Atwood novel, and it looks at little girl politics. And boy, how that can mess you up for the rest of your life. But she has a way of writing an adolescent character. And I know this was very influential for me with At the Hour Between Dog and Wolf, because I was always worried that, this would sound like a young adult novel or a children's novel, which it's not. But it is from the perspective of a 12 to 16-year-old girl. And the way Margaret Atwood can bring us into the world of adolescence in a way that feels so intimate and authentic, and yet the writing is so elegant and sophisticated and insightful. Yeah. And it's magnificent the way she does that. So that might have been one of the deep influences specifically for this book.
Wow, those are great. See, I selfishly love asking that question because I always end up taking notes. There's always somebody mentioned that maybe I forgot about or I've never heard of. And I just love it. And I appreciate this conversation and our featured book, At the Hour Between Dog and Wolf. By the way, audience, is available in paperback. In fact, I think wasn't it released in paperback?
Yeah, it was only released in paperback, but happy news, in July it's going to be available. I mean, it's also on it's available as an ebook on Kindle, but in July it is going to be released as an audiobook.
Oh, good. Yeah.
I'm really happy.
I just uplift the paperback because I love now that some authors and publishers are doing straight to paperback, which I think makes it so accessible. Obviously, summer coming up and people traveling, it makes it portable. So I want to encourage our audience to go ahead and click that button and go directly to the book passage link and order your copy of At the Hour Between Dog and Wolf.
And Beneficence and Meredith books, I may say.
Yes, we have plenty on hand at both San Francisco and Corte Madera stores. We're happy to do that online or give us a call or go into the stores. But we want you to support these events and support these authors by buying books and reading them and passing them along. So with that, thank you to our audience for joining us, whether you're live or later. And thank you to these two wonderful writers. Really such an honor. Thank you for a lively and wonderful discussion.
Thank you, Paula, for having us. Meredith, you are so incredibly kind and lovely and brilliant. Thank you so much for doing this.
That was just an extraordinarily wonderful conversation, Tara. Congratulations. I think that you have this coming weekend, you're just going to feast on this new attention. So congratulations. Enjoy it. Soak it all up. Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, such a pleasure.
Bye, everybody.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.